Hi, this is Carrie Brownstein.
This is DJ Premier.
This is Darren Aronofsky.
You got the RZA right here.
Rose McGowan.
Radiohead.
Aisha Tyler.
Tribe Called Quest. Fred Armisen.
Prince Paul.
Javier Munoz. Seth Meyers.
Tracy Cosmos.
Flying Lotus.
Hi, we're Chaim, and you're listening to the Talk House podcast.
What's up? I'm Elliot Einhorn. Welcome back to the Talk House podcast. Today I'm joined by
Nick Dawson, Editor-in-Chief of Talk House Film.
And on today's show, a fantastic conversation between Megan Griffiths and Colin Trevorrow.
Two directors with a past, and in Megan's case, a present, in the Pacific Northwest, both Seattle people. Safety Not Guaranteed was a movie that put Colin Trevorrow on the map. He's now making some bigger movies like Jurassic World.
I've heard of that one.
Book of Henry last year, which was very, very polarizing.
Megan Griffiths, of course, an indie filmmaking stalwart known for movies like Eden, Lucky Them, and The Night Stalker. She has a film out that you're very excited about, Nick.
Yeah, indeed. Sadie, which is a really powerful, thoughtful drama about a young woman with a father in the military who struggles to come to terms with her mother's new relationship. It's a great film.
And has a great cast. Melanie Linsky, John Gallagher Jr.
And Tony Hale, Danielle Brooks as well. Very strong stuff.
Now, Megan and Colin go back. They met in 2011 and were part of something that they call Crewtopia.
Yeah, the Seattle film community, indie film community at that time. So many great people came out of it, from Lynn Shelton, who, Colin calls the den mother.
She gets a few big shouts in this talk.
Absolutely, yeah. And she's kind of the figurehead of that. And Megan, of course, has worked extensively with Lynn Shelton, as has Lacey Levitt, who produced Sadie, Megan's new film, and Safety Not Guaranteed. And here, for this podcast, has a little cameo as a kind of a fact checker.
Nick, one of the things I enjoyed the most in this conversation is that Megan and Colin were really willing to go to some very uncomfortable places.
Absolutely. They touched on some stuff that's from diversity in Hollywood to some of the comments that Colin made a few years ago that got a lot of attention about the opportunities facing female directors and maybe not wanting those opportunities.
Nick, I enjoyed hearing Colin's new perceptions in that area.
He's clearly thought deeply about what he was truly saying. And obviously in the context of Me Too, it's a different thing to discuss what it is to be a woman in Hollywood. They also, of course, touch upon another woman in Hollywood issue was Bryce Dallas Howard's high heels in Jurassic World. Another controversy.
Right. There was a lot of smoke around that.
Absolutely. No, I mean, they have a very frank conversation, and I sort of love that they bring up J.J. Abrams' hiring policy and like actually having a diverse list of people. Hollywood is trying to change right now, and the conversation that they have really captures this disparity between the desire to change and the actual ability to change. As Megan said, hopefully things are actually changing rather than people just trying to make that happen.
But it also takes in things like the time machine from Safety ending up as a Burning Man sculpture.
Exactly. I think that, it's a pretty good way to go. I'm not sure if I personally would like to end up as a Burning Man sculpture.
I say just set Nick Dawson on fire right at the end of the festival,
Yeah, it could be an annual thing.
We hear about the myth of Trevorrow's overnight success.
Yeah, that's a problematic myth, and one that's kind of made him this sort of, dare I say, straw man?
You dare. The talk also takes in why Megan is a prime candidate to be a blockbuster director.
Very true. Very true. And Colin's past as a singer and a Rasta hat wearer. A side of him I did not know about before.
Who saw that one coming?
Nobody. Nobody saw that.
Should we roll the tape?
Let's roll the tape.
I thought a way for us to start would be with your name.
Oh.
Because your name is not often, it doesn't always include all the letters that you would want. And it's an opportunity now.
Well, sometimes it includes more letters than I want in the first name.
Right.
And then less letters than I'd like in the second name.
So what would you prefer?
Well, I like it spelled and pronounced the way my parents wanted it spelled and pronounced. So Megan Griffiths.
Griffiths.
With the THS.
Like Griffiths Park.
Yeah, and not Megan Griffith.
Right.
Or Griffith. Yeah.
Okay.
How about you?
I have had my name mispronounced pretty regularly for about 6 years now.
Yeah.
And it's Trevorrow.
Wait, it wasn't mispronounced before you became a name that
nobody
a lot
ever
of people
said
knew?
it.
Like in school or anything?
No, in school we were fine. It's weird. Like it's when it went out into the open range, when it went into the wild, suddenly it got mispronounced all the time. But I didn't want to correct anybody because it feels kind of douchey to correct anyone and then also to say like, well, it rhymes with tomorrow.
Yeah.
Like who wants to know that
You
guy?
said that to me the first time I met you, that it was Colin
Now you're
Trevorrow,
outing me as having said it rhymes
like
with tomorrow. Oh,
and
no.
it helped me. I never thought of it any
and I stopped
differently.
for a while, and now I feel like I have to go back because it's it's become an epidemic.
These kind of things really help me. And so I liked Trevorrow like tomorrow.
Well, there it is. So
And
Megan
now we've
Griffiths
set the record straight.
and Colin Trevorrow talking together.
At last.
At last. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
We met in 2011. I remember it clearly. You had just done what I was about to do, direct a movie for less than $1 million in Seattle.
Yes.
In the early part of this decade.
Yes.
Which was a special time in Seattle.
It was a really good time in Seattle. It was sort of the heyday of what we like to call the Crutopia time. And still, there's still like the Crutopia comes from this, it came up on the street in New York when we were trying to describe all the wonderful people who populate our sets there and how great they are. And it was like, it's a Crutopia.
Yeah.
So now it's like I don't want to get into the film incentive stuff, but it's dwindled a little bit because there's less work.
Well, it feels like now is like the Muppets Take Manhattan. Like everyone's gone off to, and they're writing each other letters from their new jobs.
Takes Manhattan.
Right. But one's at a movie theater and, one's working in a kitchen. But everybody has gone on to great things. But there was just this moment in time when I came in to do Safety Not Guaranteed, and you had just directed The Off Hours, and Mel Eslin and Lacey Levitt, and we had our den mother, Lynn Shelton, who was in both of our films.
I wonder if she'll like that or not, Den Mother.
Well, it's a Cub Scout reference that I don't know. I don't know if that even applies anymore.
Well, she was a football mom in Safety.
Oh, wait.
So.
Whose voice is that?
Is this an intervention?
That is the voice of Lacey Levitt.
Lacey Levitt's also in the room.
I didn't mean to cut in there. I'm sorry. It was not the time.
Well, welcome. Lacey is a producer who produced both Safety Not Guaranteed and Sadie, your new film, and many other films in between.
She's here as a fact checker in official capacity.
Oh, cool.
I'm going to keep you guys on track.
So, all right. So we're in 2011. It's Crutopia. That was my first film, and you had made yours. I'm curious, like what made you decide that The Off Hours specifically was going to be the movie that introduced you as a filmmaker? Amongst all the stories you had in your head, you said this one.
Well, there was a long period of time where I was doing the thing that most people tell you not to do in this industry, which was like have all of your eggs in one basket, where you write one script and then you just single focus, try to make that script until you finally do. Off Hours was that script for me up until right before we made it. So I wrote that in 2003. We finally shot it in 2010. It went to Sundance in 2011, right before I met you. And in 2009, so like right before we started shooting it, I finally was like, okay, I'm gonna write something else. And I'm gonna write something more contained and smaller that's easier to get made on no money. And that's gonna be the first thing that I make. And that was Sadie, which is actually the thing I just made.
Because I remember hearing about it all the way then.
And it was just sort of in the face of like insurmountable barriers that I started writing something else to do. And then I spent 9 years trying to get that one made.
So
but
that
I made
was
a lot of other movies in between.
I didn't see the metaphor of that movie, and now I do. Is that you were trying to get the truck stop of not being the artist that you
exactly,
wanted to
the
be.
truck stop of my AD career.
Yeah.
Which was
Which
long.
you had, up until you got out of the truck stop, had been scheduled to be for us. You were going to be our assistant director on Safety Not Guaranteed. And you went to Sundance maybe like a month before we showed up. We came in, I think about March of 2011 we showed up.
Yeah.
And I think you were maybe our AD for like a week, and we had one meeting at a diner, and everyone was like, well, Megan kind of went to Sundance, so, she may not be
probably too good for you
probably
now.
not going to do this anymore. But Mel Eslin came in and did an amazing job, and now she's producing and has gone on to amazing things. And I love looking back at that time, and Ben Kaselke as well, who shot.
He shot both
brilliant.
of our films,
Both of our
and
films.
and I just went to see his directorial debut on Saturday at the LA Film Festival.
Incredible, which I missed because I was in San Francisco, and I have great guilt about that.
Yeah,
not showing
You'll
up.
see it. I'm sure it will be get out in the world.
I just want to hang with him because he's one of the coolest people alive.
Best hair.
Yes. So I remember showing up there, and I was with Derek Connolly and Mark Duplass had recommended to us that we look into this world as a way to make a movie for $750,000, which is what we had. How much was The Off Hours? It was less than that.
Lacey can fact check me on
How
this.
much
We
was
were just all told, we were just over 100,000
Oh my God.
by the end of the day, because we had a sort of a false start in 2007 where we raised 50,000. And so, but we actually made it. We've made it for about 70, I think.
Right.
If you don't count that, all the money that went into the false start.
Yeah.
Well, for anyone who's not made films before who's listening, that is impossible. That is not a
Mark
real
Duplass
thing.
is in his living room going,
No, I did it. I did it for 15. He is a master of it, and he's taught us all how to get by on very little. But I guess when we came, we were kind of like a big budget production at 750.
You were like the thing where I know like Lacey could go work on it and be like, I can pay you now.
Right.
I can pay
like
you
Hollywood
something.
showing up.
Yeah.
$750,000.
We're gonna get the band back together, but we're actually gonna pay you this time.
Yeah.
It was actually, I had a sticky on my laptop for that whole show. The budget for safety was $752,000.48.
Right.
Or sorry, $752,048. That was
Sounds about
like the exact until
Wow.
you guys went to post. But that number is
Right.
stuck in my brain forever.
The time machine cost a little extra money. That wasn't well. I mean, it'd be fun to talk about it because it was really like I've had this rash of really sentimental and positive memories about that time. Not that they went away, but like it's all been drummed up. I have an office. I live in London now, and we have an office. And one of the things that I wanted in the office was a blueprint of the time machine. So I went back and dug through Ben Blankenship's archives that he gave me and pulled all this stuff. And we gave it to this guy who makes blueprints for people's boats. And it's incredible. I shouldn't have told you because I was going to give it to people as a gift. So hopefully people won't listen to
Like
this.
a little scale model kind
No,
of
it's like a big blueprint, as if, an architectural schematic
That's
blueprint of the time machine with
Ben's gonna
all
be
of his
so
stuff.
honored.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Ben also is the production designer on The Off Hours, and he's
Yes.
a production designer on Sadie. So shared love for him. And the day that you guys shot the time machine on Safety was the only day I visited.
Good day.
And it was a good day.
Good day.
It was a real fun day to be there.
It was incredible, and I think now that I've made a couple movies with larger budget since, and I think I didn't really understand how much of a miracle that was at the time because to me that we had a ton of money, and we're like, well, yeah, of course, people just make practical time machines in old army boats and bring them in a truck to this is just what happens on
isolated
movies.
lake,
yeah,
just like
and no,
you know
that
how you
was
got
it was
there.
an absolute miracle, and it's gone. We can't. They had to take it all apart because they borrowed all the pieces, all that machinery from various sources. They rented it for like the weekend to put together into this thing.
It became a Burning Man sculpture, most of it.
Well, that's
a guy
cool.
was building a Burning Man sculpture, and he and Ben were bidding on the same stuff, like metal scrap. And then they were like, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? And so Miguel Edwards helped make the time machine. And then at the end of it, he got to take it and go make a Burning Man sculpture.
I remember feeling like
Lives in
my
infamy.
ambition is someday to be able to afford to buy this thing that you've created, but I can't now, and I can't convince you to just hold on to it until I can. So it's been torn apart.
Yeah.
Sadly.
It is sad.
But we all
felt
have
that way
our
about the Off Hours Diner sign.
Oh, yeah.
Which actually lived. We were actually prepping to get ready to shoot, and at this abandoned diner that we shot in, and this person stopped by to see what was going on, and it turned out to be a person who created those like laminate signs or whatever, and fiberglass signs that it sort of go into those backlit signposts. And so he made us one for free because that's how things worked on the off hours. Like people just volunteered all these amazing things like semi trucks and signs and ambulances and stuff. Then the diner got, like a couple years later, the diner got demolished and the sign was still there with our thing in it. And then there was like a fair that went up behind it, and there's this amazing photo of like the off hours sign in the foreground and like this like Ferris wheel and lit up in the background, and now it's all gone and it's like a condo.
Oh, the one thing we have, like those, you cherish those things forever. The one thing I have is Ben Blankenship somehow managed to get me the laser, the laser that he steals.
Yeah.
And I remember when it happened, I was like, oh my God, if I could have that would be the most amazing thing. And it was very expensive. There was no way they were going to give it to us. It was like a real piece. And somehow he may have stolen it. I'm outing him now.
Oh.
Which I don't
Statute of
know how he
limitations?
got it. Yeah, statute of limitations. But I cherish it very much. And Derek's thing that he got is I got him the original. It was in a this sort of. No, I don't want to call him a gun nut, but it was like a survivalist magazine. The guy who wrote the original Season Not Guaranteed ad. So I got one of the few remaining copies of the original survivalist magazine, and I had it framed that where it all began, and that's all we have left. And a movie.
And a movie, which is the immortalization of all of it.
I hope so. That was only, it was 6 years ago when Safety came out, and I guess 7 years ago for your first film.
Yeah.
So it's not forever.
Technically not my first feature.
What was your first? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I thought it was.
This is an organic learning
Now I'm
moment.
learning. What was your first feature?
I made a film in 2002 called First Aid for Choking.
I did not know this.
Most people don't. Off Hours is almost always credited with being my first feature.
Okay, so I'm not like a complete asshole.
No,
Okay,
totally.
good.
I actually don't correct people a lot of the time like you don't with your last name because I just don't want to be like, it's not my first feature. But I made this other film when I first got out of film school. I got to Seattle and there was this like real renegade sort of film community, and I was really inspired by the people, and I made this film. And it really didn't see the light of day very much. It was seen around some small film festivals, and it got a distribution deal through Film Threat DVD, non-existent anymore. But then I went and worked on other people's movies for 8 years and before Off Hours. And I think you can look at the two. If you can find First Aid for Choking, you can look at the two side by side and see the growth of like what it means to go work on other people's movies and learn from other directors and the mistakes and failures of other filmmakers.
Right.
So yeah, so that's the only reason I bring it up now, not to just correct you.
This is the place to do it. It's interesting that you seem to have chosen a path that was very production based from your first feature, as we now know, to your second feature. One of the reasons I think why we were able to even get the budget that we got is that I had been working in Hollywood for a long time as a writer. And so when I made Safety, I think one of the real advantages that I had is that when I went on that round of meetings that we have, even before the movie came out after Sundance, I knew a lot of the people because I'd worked for every studio at that point as a screenwriter, and I'd sold multiple spec scripts. So I was a known entity in a way that I think a lot of—
Did you have stuff that had been produced that you were a writer on before
Never
Safety?
produced, but it's Hollywood, so
totally.
you sell specs. These things stay in development forever. I think I'd actually worked for everyone but Universal, which is where I work now. But I sold my first spec to Steven Spielberg and DreamWorks when I was 30. It was called Tester. And then I worked on that script with Walter Parks, who was the producer who bought it, for like 5 years.
Wow.
And he just like drilled down on me and taught me how to be a writer. And it was tedious and endless and long and not profitable.
And how old were you then?
I was 30 when I directed Safety when I was, I think, 37 to 38. 37, and so I don't remember. It's something like that.
But I remember when we met you, not what your age was.
It felt like, it felt like a very, and during that time I sold other specs, and so I was writing original stuff, and I was writing, pretty large scale, mainstream entertainments as a writer. And so I think when I went and made Safety, which had these, there are veins of mainstream entertainment that flow throughout it, even though it's an independently budgeted film, and it has a very mainstream choice at the end.
Right. And that works, I think, in the movie's favor, but also probably worked in your favor as a person going out into the world to be hired.
I agree. It does. I mean, Steven Spielberg said that to me directly, that like that choice that you made, you had a choice to be an independent director or a mainstream director. And with that choice, you declared yourself a mainstream director.
He's a smart man. I think that's true. Because it's not how the script ended.
No, it wasn't. And it wasn't my intention to make that declaration either.
Really? Even in the post-process?
I wasn't out to know. I just thought it would be awesome. And I thought it would be beautiful and hopeful. and like it's what I wanted to see as an audience member. But doing what you want to see as an audience member is maybe considered a mainstream choice. It's a mainstream kind of thinking.
I guess it depends on what kind of audience member you are.
Very true. Very true. It is interesting to see how these little choices you make, the butterfly effect of that can change, trajectories. But I think the combination of that with the fact that executives that I met with all knew me already, and they're like, well, like he's been writing within this structure for a while. Like he kind of knows how to fit into this very mainstream entertainment world with the stuff that he's creating. So there's like the learning process will be less as we try to take this independent young mind and forge him into something that can make us money.
Like
we're
his
a podcast,
instincts
so I
are
can,
where they want.
Yeah, they're like excellent. They're exactly where we need them. Good.
One of the things that just to interject, it's so funny because you guys have such different career trajectories in some respects. Like you're talking about how you've had this incremental step-by-step process as a filmmaker. And Colin, of course, how most people know you is like the guy who did the one Safety Not Guaranteed and then made Jurassic World. But when you explain it, which is what I always explain to young folks who ask me about you, which by the way happens all the time still, I say like he was not an overnight success. He wrote for 10 years. Yeah. He was working in the industry for 10 years and you never knew who he was before he got to make Safety Not Guaranteed. So although at a certain point the optics of it is that you're an overnight success, you were an overnight success after 10 years.
I feel like it's almost a disadvantage as a message to a younger people to think that it's possible to be an overnight success. And I think that there's a media narrative that especially when Jurassic World came out, people, Steven Spielberg chose this guy and like he made this movie. And I don't know if that's very helpful because I feel like then you look at it and say, oh, I can just be in a 7-Eleven and wearing a ball cap and Steven Spielberg point his finger at me and suddenly I'm making Jurassic World. It's really hard and it takes for everybody, all of us, a long period of consistent failure. And we can talk about our failures, and I think we should, because they continue beyond that. They happen all the time. And you just get constantly like slammed down into the surf again and again.
This industry really has a way of grounding you.
Yeah.
Just keeping you humble.
Yeah.
All the time.
Every day. Every day.
You're like, I am walking on air. I just had the greatest screening. And then like a review comes out that's not great or whatever.
I never trust the good though. Like I'm always very suspicious of the good. And yet when the bad I take as gospel truth. So like even moments when you would have thought, the weekend Jurassic World came out, like that, the movie being released itself was kind of, it wasn't a happy experience for me. I was so dialed into, the concerns about what Bryce was wearing on her feet. And that was obviously like not our intention. And so the idea that people were perceiving that to be a negative thing while we had worked so hard to make this thing, it made me just miserable. I did not enjoy that summer whatsoever.
Had there been a conversation about that, like on set from her or anyone, just bringing that up, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, absolutely. It was something that she very much wanted to do. And we talked about it quite a bit, and she felt it was a character choice. And I think that there was, when it happened, there was kind of this moment that the only thing that made me uncomfortable about it, because, you're a director, the buck stops with you. I have conversations with all of my actors all the time. And, it was something that she just thought was empowering and awesome. And I supported it. There was a moment when it was suggested like I made her do it. As if I'm like it's 1920s, like, listen, chickie, you're going to run in those heels and you're going to love it.
You would like to think that only happened in the 1920s.
Right. Or it could happen now too. But no,
but that's not what you did.
No, that's certainly not. But
I do like the word chickie. Actually, I might start using
people
that.
used to say that, right?
Yeah, I like it.
But but when you make a certain set of choices, and if choices aren't received well, for me it's like all I hear. I don't know what it is like for you, but it's all I hear.
It is a little scary to think about being in the position you were on in Jurassic World, and like having so many millions of people who have, in your case, a lot of investment in the story you're telling already. Being able to like judge you. So you had the big jump, and there's a lot of people like waiting for you to fail.
Sure, absolutely. And it's really hard, because of that. It's almost impossible to talk about my own experience without people just being like, shut the fuck up, man. Like, you're doing fine. Like,
right.
You had this giant leap. Like, I don't want to hear about what's hard for you about it. So that's why it's nice to sit with another filmmaker, because like filmmakers understand that this process is hard. This process has like, horrible heartbreaks throughout it.
Yeah.
No matter what level you're working at.
Yeah.
And it's just truth that we all share.
Yeah. And I mean, there's the part of it where, the conversation around how that happens way more often for white men than it does for people of color or women, which I think is, a valid conversation alongside of the other stuff.
Well, just empirically true.
Yeah, and totally true.
There's no way to debate it.
Hopefully to get less true every year. But it's interesting. I know that there was a offhand comment that you made about that at one point, about like maybe women just aren't wanting those opportunities, and you got a lot of backlash for that.
Sure, and deserved, but it was a moment when I was talking about like Lynn Shelton, like specifically.
She knew that. She was like, "Oh God, that was me who said that."
Oh no. I was kind of in that same place after I'd done Jurassic. and I had, we have a movie called Intelligent Life that Rebecca Thomas is directing now, and that was the movie. That was the first thing I was going to do to like start producing, which is something that's important to me. And so I was out like talking to agents, and specifically, I wanted a woman to direct the movie, and I was very vocal about it. And this is when I was in prep on Book of Henry. I was in New York, and I just got a lot of stuff back from agents of like, oh no, she doesn't want to do like a giant studio thing. Like she doesn't want to deal with it. And what was interesting, like in light of everything that we're talking about now, to kind of recontextualize what she doesn't want to deal with it might have meant is something that I've thought about recently as I've seen, like what that experience might have been that I wasn't even thinking about at the time. I was just thinking about interest and connection to material. But it wasn't, this script isn't for her. It was that like she's got her own thing that she wants to do. And she's, I remember Jennifer Kent, who I think is like one of the, like a Peter Jackson level debut of a filmmaker. And I was like, oh, well then, she's going to do like something huge. And she got offered a lot of big things, but ultimately chose to make The Nightingale, which is coming out right now, which is very personal to her. And I think that, even if I chose my words poorly, what I was thinking was it is important that just because like the new measure of success seems to be, Marvel blockbusters or these big things. That doesn't mean that every filmmaker is going to have an interest in doing those kinds of movies. And you and I had a lot of conversations about it too. Of like, would you want to, take a script written by somebody else that is fit into like a larger universe that you may or may not have even been interested in, at any time in your life, and find a way to find something within it that speaks to you. And some people are able to do it.
And I would. Yeah. I mean, and that's like, and I feel like I should probably say to all the studio executives listening to this that Lynn might also want to do that. And at this point, it might have a different answer than she gave you earlier.
That's why I never mentioned her name. I didn't want to like suddenly, I don't want to speak for her.
I think she may have a different point of view. But yeah, no, I think it's the idea that like, it's going to be a challenging situation for anyone to walk in the door of that kind of experience or opportunity. I mean, you're just... it's hard enough to direct when there's like one other voice that has equal power to you, where if you're walking into a situation like that, you don't necessarily even have buck stops here kind of power as a director, and your name is on it. But yeah, I mean, as much as like that kind of stuff is sort of scary, especially as an indie filmmaker person who's had a lot of creative control, like it is like you don't want the message to be like, I wouldn't want that opportunity because it sounds hard. It's like everyone should be, people should be sort of equally presented with that opportunity.
Absolutely.
And then
100%.
hopefully take it or not, depending on who exactly you are, as opposed to like what gender you are or what race you are or whatever. So hopefully people are learning that.
I think learning and things are slowly changing. And I think if you look at the landscape now, versus 3 years ago. I don't think there's been a revolution, but this has been chipped away at, I think, in a significant way. And I just hope that what seems to be happening now, I'm producing 2 movies right now. Both of them are directed by women. One of them had another director who was on for a while, went off to direct another giant movie, and the new director we hired was a woman. I think that it being inside, for me, I'm inside the castle. Like I'm able to hear the way they talk in the boardrooms, and I understand.
Awful.
Well, but like on a positive note, like they're talking about this inside the castle,
good. It's penetrated the castle
absolutely
walls.
Like the castle is taking this very seriously.
Under threat of storming the castle, they're talking about it inside the castle.
Well, sometimes that's what it takes.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, it's under threat of lawsuits from the ACLU.
Yeah.
Now
Exactly.
there is actually movement happening.
But
which
there
is great.
is like it's a real conversation that there is actionable change that's happening as a result of everyone having their feet held to the fire by I mean, when we look back at some of the things that our generation did, I think we make great, like food is great. Like I think we did a lot for food, and I think we made some change here. There's a lot of people who realize that this is an imbalance that is wrong, and that has to be actively altered.
I really hope it's true. It's funny because there's been these like sea changey kind of feeling moments in the past, especially on gender stuff, and yet the numbers don't change year after year. So I'm really hoping that the next report that comes out does actually show like that there has been progress in the actual percentage of movies that are directed by women and people of color. And I just don't know. It's like I want to wait to see it actually like manifest. It has in television to a degree that's way greater than film, if not, it's not like move the needle to the middle or anything, but it's definitely, the change is more visible there. But in terms of big budget sort of studio release movies, it still hasn't registered on the actual
No, very, very measured progress. I don't think sea change could be applied at all. And you know, the only thing
I'm hopeful about it, but I'm just like reserving my happy dance for a little bit.
And you know, one of the things I think that was identified about my situation, you know, of what I was a symptom of, which is just undeniable, that I think is very positive, is that like, look, like it is probably easier and more instinctive for you to look at someone who looks like you and say that person reminds me of me.
Right.
And I think that, you know, I can say Emily Carmichael reminds me of me. And it's not because of how she looks or who she is as a woman. It's who she is as a writer and a thinker and a creator. And that, I think, just being able to take that one little step, you know, beyond, you know, what has always been our comfort zone, and just see if maybe there's someone who doesn't look like you who does remind you of you. Because that part is probably always going to apply. Like, you want to find somebody who like connects with your creative instincts. But that person doesn't necessarily have to be a white male. Or any of those descriptives, and most likely won't be if you just look a little harder.
Yeah. I really liked what J.J. Abrams did in terms of sort of combating this at Bad Robot. And like basically looking at the demographic breakdown of the population and saying I would like the list that I get for these hires to reflect that. Percentage, like, you know, 51% women or whatever, and like just on down the line for all these different types of people. And I just was like, even if that just makes it to the list stage, it's huge, because there's all these people who've never made those lists, who would then, people would have to go out and like seek them out and find their work and find the best people in every category and like show them to a person who can make some big decision making, you know, power. And so I love that. And I was like, that should be the thing that just gets applied across all the studios. That would make a giant difference, because ultimately they're going to hire who they're going to hire, but at least they'll see people who aren't the same 5 people they already know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%. Do you now, when you look back on the movies that you've made, because I've been, you know, looking within and trying to find patterns and like what interests you in these different things. And I've seen certain patterns in my work that I may not have been conscious, you know.
Yeah, I do that too now. I think the way I talk about it, like with the empathy thing and the like understanding people's behavior, I understand. I wouldn't be able to say that, I don't think, when I was making the off hours. It's like only through talking about all the movies you make over the years, because it's been 5 movies since then. You know, it's like, oh yeah, there are these patterns that emerge.
Yeah.
I'm not so unpredictable, even though I jump around on the genre.
Yeah, but the movies you make inform you of what your own interests are, what, you know, all of those things to a certain extent. I've like my thing that I found, because all of my movies are similar in this way, is that it's somebody who gets better. Over the course, who's making not great choices and is in a place that is almost unlikable, and through an experience and in certain cases like a traumatic set of experiences, finds their own truth, finds their ability to be the person they have the potential to be, and that's very personal for me. And in my life, you know, when I look back and I grew up in a very different way. I didn't travel around. I grew up in Oakland, California, and I was in the arts from a very young age. My father was like a country rock star, and like to me, and he was a regional country rock star. But to me, he was the biggest rock star in the world. But he would open for like Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings and Crystal Gale and all these cool country artists. And this is like the early '80s. So I got to see my dad up on stage, you know, performing for all these people, and so I was energized to get into the arts very early. And my mom was so supportive. I think she was like disappointed I didn't become a singer, which very few mothers are disappointed their child didn't go into an impossible.
You chose a different impossible career.
Yeah, we chose a different impossible career.
Were you a singer though for a little while?
I was a singer for a long time. In San Francisco, I was in the San Francisco Boys Choir, and I was in the opera, and so I was in the San Francisco Opera, and I was a little boy singer. But it was it was San Francisco in the '80s, so actually, you know, most of my mentors growing up were gay men. Yeah, and you know, I don't want to name any individuals who, and there's some who are no longer alive. They're no longer with us because this was San Francisco in the '80s, and AIDS was a scourge. And I learned a lot about a world that most kids are probably sheltered from. And there was a huge homeless problem going on in the 80s in San Francisco, and so if you were going into that city, you saw a lot more out than a lot of kids in their neighborhood were witness to. And because of the singing, I got into a group that was in Oakland, California, like a youth choir, and I was like the only white guy. And it was a time like before like we sort of identified like appropriation, where like the white guy would wear like a sort of rainbow Rasta hat and stuff. And like, I know it was rough, but it was before we kind of ID'd that stuff. It's like, no, not so much.
Yeah, my dad taught chemistry, which draws a lot of, he was mostly teaching graduate students in my high school years and stuff. And we would have Thanksgiving dinner parties where everyone who didn't like go home for Thanksgiving, which was all the international students, would come to our house. And we would put out, a bunch of tables, and my mom would ask everyone to bring some dish from their home country that they liked. And then we'd have these like Thanksgiving dinners that included like turkey, but also like dolmadas and like sushi and, just all these things from all over the cultural spectrum. And I at the time I was like, oh my God, there's all these people at my house. It's like so stressful. But when I think back on it, I'm like, wow, what a rich environment to get to be growing up and to like get to have exposure to all these different cultures. It's before the internet, before everybody got to like have friends in all sorts of countries if they want to. But like I just was like exposed to that through the.
Well, it's because it's actually, I think that makes you a great candidate for being a maker of blockbuster films, and I will explain. I think
please do.
I'm going
listen
to.
up, everybody.
I think that one of the things that I've found to be a necessity is to really understand the perspectives of others and hold multiple points of view in your head at the same time. If you're going to make a movie that needs to play in all parts of America right off the bat, when you think of how different it is from where I grew up in Oakland to Florida to Vermont, where we lived for a long time, and America is a very disparate place, and yet everyone has the right to be entertained. Even people who I disagree with politically have the right to be entertained when it comes to this, these kind of films. And then add to that the whole world. These are global films, so it has to simultaneously play to a child in China and a grandmother, in South Africa and someone in Russia. Like when you think of all the perspectives, it is. It's daunting. And so part of the job and something I've really embraced is watching films from these countries, traveling to these places. I live in London, so I take my family to Morocco and to Greece and to Scandinavia, places where they can get certainly it's great for my kids, but I'm there trying to talk to as many people as possible and just like understanding, well, what entertains you? Like, what's your storytelling? And I've watched, there's Chinese films I've watched that I don't know if they were released here, but you should like watch The Mermaid. Have you ever seen The Mermaid? I mean, and like Wolf Warrior 2, like the big Chinese blockbusters. The style of the way that they communicate story. And I think one of the reasons why James Cameron has been so successful is I think he really paid attention to the storytelling patterns that people respond to globally. And what are the things that are unique among us. And in the case of Titanic and Avatar, both have sort of vaguely American or corporate military evil. There's a male and a female lead, a strong female lead, who is one of them is taken into a world where they never could have imagined, either a big ship or or a planet, and then the second half descends into horrible, brutal violence. And there's and actually Jurassic World is actually very similar, in the way that it's structured. And I think that the world is certainly happy to look at American greed, capitalism, or military as a kind of evil, and that set of values. And I think there's a romance that we all like around the world still either secretly or openly kind of yearn for. But romance is defined differently for everybody, so it's really hard to like find something that can work, on that kind of a level. But I think you'd be great at it.
Oh, thank you. I'm realizing that Sadie sort of hits those buttons too, actually, because it is, especially in terms of, there's like a romance element to it. There's a lot of interpersonal relationship-y stuff, but also it calls into question sort of the way that we solve problems as a country. And I feel like other countries might be also somewhat critical of the way we do that because, it's a movie that is about a young girl, but I always think of it as a war movie. And like part of it is that she's learning from the world she lives in that how to solve problems is through violence. And so she's learning that all the way up to, her dad who's a soldier, and he's part of this, large machine that goes into other countries and solves problems with violence. Not entirely, not to paint the military with one broad brush, but there is sort of an overarching lesson that comes out of it is like, this is how we're going to go fight a war to solve this problem. And then there's, it kind of goes down through, the media we consume and the way we solve problems just in front of children in a much more microcosmic way, that all of these things are feeding them and they're absorbing them. And how is that impacting the way they solve problems as in their own problems? And how is it impacting how they see the difference between right and wrong and all this stuff? So it is sort of a small little story, but it has these big themes that I would like to think that other countries would. Yeah, actually, I know that they will because I took the film to Italy. It had an international premiere at Giffoni Film Festival in Italy, and it's a film festival for youth, and there's youth from 50 plus countries, and they all come together, and they're your jury. And you're in various categories. We were in the 16 to 18 category, and our star is a 14-year-old, and they watched the movie. I interacted with them, had a 45-minute Q&A, and then at the end of the day, we won. For best film. And it was like, the way we talked about it was like, oh, these themes are not just American themes. These are themes that transcend countries and borders that people identify with. A lot of people are worried about the consequence-free violence that everyone's being shown in all sorts of media and how that's affecting people. And even kids who are being affected by it are worried about it. Yeah. And that's really interesting to me because it's not something I even necessarily predicted was how much kids were going to understand the movie. And I really didn't predict it would necessarily, that a non-American audience would resonate that way with it.
It's frustrating that so many of those issues that you brought up have been politicized because so many of them shouldn't be political issues. They're they're parenting issues or human issues.
Yeah.
I think that what's interesting about this film, and I think all your films, tend to take on, I guess Lucky Them was maybe not, your most, intense movie of the moment.
It had a less deep, dark theme.
Right.
It was more about a person's journey and the way you see yourself. And
so I won't say all.
Yeah.
But they don't paint with broad strokes was my point. And I feel like right now it's very easy, and I've definitely, I've suffered from this myself, is if you are not absolutely very clear and specific in your intentions in either something you say or something that's in your film, generalizations are applied to your words.
Oh yeah,
that
we live in an
era
where nuance is not really part of the conversation.
And that's tough, but it's not, and yet to allow that to be woven into your work, that nuance is something that, while simultaneously needing to take into consideration all those other things, everyone that's going to watch it, who's totally different. I had a film that I made last year that was, it both like my biggest failure as a filmmaker, and yet also simultaneously the thing something I love deeply, and also was made with intentions to appeal to a very broad audience. And the Book of Henry was made for. I was kind of making a faith-based film, and I found that faith-based films often are not able to reach outside the the community that they are assigned to.
Yeah.
And I felt like this was something that I was very confident when I read it was going to appeal to, especially in America, a pretty wide swath of people. And we tested that movie, and we tested it at 90. And when you tested at 90, you open it at a good time, you feel really good. And you open it at a good time of year and you're like, wow, we got it. People love this movie. And then that movie, ran, it has to get through the cities and it has to get through that perspective. And it just was not received in any way that was similar to the way that the test audience was received it. And I don't say that, critics or people who didn't like the movie are wrong. It's just that, people have very different needs from their storytelling and from their films. And so I think that there was a bit of a miscalculation, on my part of like, I'm making a movie for an audience that's actually never going to get to see it because it's not going to get out of the spout that it has to go through in order to reach those people.
I feel like that I can relate because it remains to be seen whether Sadie will make it through the gauntlet into lots of homes. But like, we just took it, Lacey and I, to across the South on this thing called the Southern Circuit, and we took it to a lot of people who don't live on the other side of the gatekeeper's barrier in the critical circles. You know, they don't live in cities, and actually many of them never had met a filmmaker before and didn't have independent theaters in their towns. And so it did resonate with those, and in red states too. You know, it's like, I think purposefully, I say I think because it's been 9 years and it's hard to remember, but I don't think that there was an intention to make this like, you know, a political movie. It's about big political ideas, I guess, but it's not a movie where the character pulls out a gun and shoots a lot of people. But that is part of the backdrop of the story, is gun violence. And but I think the journey that Sadie goes on the course of it, I don't think is a red or blue journey. Like,
I agree with you.
I think you can look at her story and have a takeaway from it, even if you are in the military, even if you are a gun owner, even if you don't really have a problem with like a lot of violence in your media, but you could still see that there might be an effect on children from all of these things cumulatively, and be concerned about that as a person who lives in this world. You know, so I think it's interesting to think about like the audience of it, because I didn't get a lot of pushback from people in the South thinking I'd made like some like super liberal like commie movie, you know. Like,
yeah, I don't think it doesn't play that. It doesn't feel that way.
Yeah.
I feel like, you know, and you know, even where
I'm certainly
you
coming
grew up,
from that place though politically, so it's like nice to know that it doesn't necessarily alienate people in that way.
But you traveled a lot when you were younger. You saw a lot of different parts of this country, and you were aware that, you know, there is no single brush that can paint all people. And you know, and I think it's, you know, you are very brave to have made a movie about what you made a film about. You have made a set of choices as a filmmaker that I know will define you long into the future, and are very much a part of who you are. And the fact that you have, you know, made a choice to make so many movies about challenging subjects that sometimes are uncomfortable subjects. As someone who has made a similar choice, I appreciate it so much.
Thank you. Ditto.
Ditto.
Ditto is a good word to end on, right?
All right.
I know.
We're done.
Thank you, Colin.
Thank you.
That was really fun.
It was a lot of fun. And thank you to Megan and Colin for that. And I'm not going to ruin it, but there will be more from them in our Best of episode later in the year, because there's some choice nuggets from that conversation that I have, unreleased clips that are going to resurface.
Thanks also to our engineer Chase McElhenney and 4th Street Recording in Santa Monica, where this conversation was taped.
They were wonderful hosts.
Shouts as always to our producer Markio Shizumi and to The Range, who composed and performed our fantastic theme song.
Go hit us up on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, and go to talkhouse.com for amazing written daily content.
Also, aside from subscribing for new episodes, Nick, take a look in our archive. A couple of the artists named in today's episode have recorded podcasts with us.
Of course, we have Melanie Linsky, who's in Sadie, and then we have Lynn Shelton.
Lynn Shelton.
The den mother herself.
I'm Ellie Einhorn.
I'm Nick Dawson.
And we'll see you next week.
Peace.
Bye.